Perfect. Let's expand Chapter 1 into a full-length emotional narration, around 3,000 words, keeping the hook strong, the pace steady, and the emotions layered for YouTube storytelling. I'll write it in long flowing paragraphs, no headings, so it feels natural for narration. Chapter 1 expanded. The rain poured like sheets of glass against the towering windows of the city, a storm that made the neon lights blur into rivers of color across the wet pavement. The sidewalks overflowed with people clutching umbrellas, taxis screeching, horns blaring. Yet, within the noise and rush of the evening, a quiet moment was about to unfold that none of them could have imagined. It would begin with just a whisper, so soft it almost drowned beneath the storm, yet powerful enough to alter two lives forever. Inside the most prestigious restaurant in the district, warmth reigned. Chandeliers dripped with crystals, golden light reflecting off polished wine glasses. The air was thick with the fragrance of rosemary lamb, buttered lobster, and freshly baked bread. Men in tailored suits leaned back in velvet chairs, laughing with confidence. Women in silk dresses sipped champagne, their manicured fingers glittering with diamonds. Waiters moved like shadows, graceful and silent, their trays heavy with delicacies most people would never taste in their lives. It was the world of the privileged, untouchable, unreachable. But just beyond the tall glass doors stood a girl, thin as a shadow herself, her hair damp and clinging to her pale cheeks. Her clothes clung to her body from the rain, the fabric so worn that threads dangled loose like memories of better days. She pressed her hands to the glass, not daring to step inside, her eyes scanning the tables as though searching for something, anything, that could quiet the gnawing in her stomach. She was 19, though hunger and hardship had carved years onto her face. Inside, at a table for two though only one sat there, a man named Daniel Hartman was finishing his dinner. He was a figure most recognized in newspapers, magazines, and business forums, a millionaire investor whose sharp mind and colder heart had built an empire from nothing. People admired him, envied him, even feared him, but rarely did anyone truly know him. His eyes, a piercing gray, often seemed as if they were scanning a chessboard that only he could see. To him, life was business. Every person, every opportunity, every decision was weighed for profit or loss. Tonight, though, even he wasn't thinking of the $1 million deal he had closed that afternoon. He sat staring at the half-finished plate before him, his thoughts wandering places money couldn't reach. He had ordered a lavish meal, steak, potatoes glazed in truffle oil, asparagus tossed in butter. But half of it lay untouched, his appetite fading as his loneliness pressed heavier against his chest. For all his wealth, he ate alone more often than not. As the waiter approached to clear the table, Daniel's gaze lifted toward the window. And there, through the sheet of rain and glass, he saw her. A girl, fragile, trembling, her eyes, wide, luminous despite the shadows of hunger, met his for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Something inside him stirred, like an old wound opening where he had long thought the scar was firm. The waiter, embarrassed by the sight of her, rushed to push her away. But then came the moment, the whisper that cut through storm and silence alike. "May I have your leftovers, sir?" Her voice carried into the restaurant, fragile but unwavering, piercing every pair of ears that overheard it. A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. People shifted in their seats, pretending not to notice, their laughter fading into awkward murmurs. Daniel's hand froze, midair, his fork still on the table. For years, he had ignored voices like that, voices begging on the streets, at traffic lights, in alleys. He had always told himself it wasn't his problem, that the world rewarded those who fought for more and punished those who didn't. Yet something about this girl's voice, it wasn't just desperation. It was courage, raw and unfiltered, asking for dignity where the world had left her none. He lifted his hand before the waiter could shoo her away. "Bring her in," he said quietly. The restaurant hushed. Forks paused mid-bite, wine glasses halted mid-air. No one understood what was happening. The girl looked stunned, frozen at the threshold as the waiter hesitated, unsure whether to obey. Daniel's gaze did not falter. "I said, bring her in." His voice carried authority, the kind of command that even the wealthiest patrons couldn't question. The waiter opened the door, and she stepped inside. Rainwater dripped from her sleeves onto the marble floor, her shoes squeaking faintly as she walked. She held herself small, as if trying to disappear into the grand room where she clearly did not belong. Whispered judgments echoed around her, words like, unhygienic, disturbance, charity case. But Daniel silenced them all with a look as he pulled out the chair across from his. Sit, he said simply. Her hands trembled as she lowered herself into the velvet seat. She could not meet his eyes at first, too ashamed, too overwhelmed by the weight of curious stares. Daniel slid his half-eaten plate across the table toward her. Eat. At first, she hesitated. Pride battled hunger in her eyes, and pride almost won. But the ache in her stomach was stronger. She picked up the fork, and with a trembling hand, she took a bite. Tears filled her eyes instantly, not because the food was exquisite, but because for the first time in months, someone had looked at her and said she was worth something. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the clinking glasses of the restaurant. Daniel watched her closely. He noticed the way she ate slowly, savoring every bite as though afraid it might vanish. He noticed the way she wiped her eyes discreetly, unwilling to show weakness. And he noticed the flicker of light in her expression, the light of someone who had been beaten down yet refused to be broken. What's your name? Daniel asked after a while. Eliza, she replied softly. Eliza Moore. Her voice carried a music he hadn't heard in years, delicate yet steady. He leaned forward slightly, curiosity replacing the cold indifference that usually cloaked his demeanor. Where are your parents? She lowered her gaze. I don't know. I never knew them. I grew up in foster care. Ran away a few months ago. Thought I'd find something better on my own. I was wrong. Her honesty disarmed him. Most people who sat across from Daniel wanted something, his money, his approval, his power. But Eliza, she had nothing to gain, nothing to hide. She wasn't here to manipulate. She was here because hunger had left her no choice. Why not go back? He asked. Her lips tightened. Back means pain. Back means being reminded every day that no one wants you. I'd rather starve in the streets than live unloved in a house that isn't mine. Her words cut through him like glass. He, too, knew what it meant to feel unwanted. His father had left when he was only a boy, disappearing without explanation. His mother had struggled, sacrificing everything for him, but he had never felt truly secure, never felt truly chosen. Perhaps that was why he had buried himself in wealth, because money never abandoned, never rejected. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years, a crack in his armor. Eliza, he said finally, if you could have anything right now, what would it be? She thought for a long while, her fork pausing midair. Finally, she answered, a chance. Not money, not pity. Just a chance to stand on my own. To prove I'm not invisible. And just as those words hung in the air, the door burst open. A man stormed into the restaurant, his voice booming above the murmurs. Eliza, there you are. His tone was harsh, his eyes filled with anger. He was tall, rough-looking, his clothes ragged but his grip iron as he seized her arm. Let me go, she cried, her voice breaking as she tried to pull back. This girl's a thief, the man barked to the room. Runs with a gang on the streets. Don't let her fool you with her pretty little lies. Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Judgment returned to the faces around them, sharper now, cutting Eliza with every glance. She shook her head furiously, tears spilling down her cheeks. That's not true. I'm not a thief, I swear. Daniel rose slowly from his chair. His face hardened, his voice low but edged with steel. Let her go. The man sneered. And who are you to say? Daniel's gaze darkened, cold as winter. I said let her go. Or you'll regret it. There was a weight in his tone, the kind of authority only years of command and control could forge. The man faltered, fear flickering briefly in his eyes. After a tense moment, he released Eliza's arm with a shove and stormed out, muttering curses under his breath. The room was silent again, but this time, the silence was different. Every patron stared, unsure of what they had just witnessed. But Daniel didn't care. His eyes were on Eliza, who stood trembling, tears streaking her face. He stepped forward, taking off his coat and wrapping it gently around her shoulders. She clutched it tightly, as though it were a lifeline. For the first time, she allowed herself to look into his eyes fully, and in that gaze, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, connection, something deeper than chance. Daniel didn't understand it yet, but he knew this was no ordinary encounter. The girl who had asked for leftovers had just given him something he never knew he needed, a reason to feel. And though the storm still raged outside, inside Daniel Hardman's world, a miracle had just begun.